while ago, we recognized people from the communications department on our coding platform, and then we figured out, hey, the people there are responsible for the Siemens.com website, and then later on we met each other, talking, exchanging, and so on, and yeah, happy to have Christoph here. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Roger. So, welcome to the last, or one of the last talks today, and I want to talk about code-driven communication. So, I prepared some bullet points for you, what I want to talk about. First of all, who is talking, where communication goes code-driven, and why we are doing this. What is a foundational framework for us to go code-driven? What's the outcome of that? Where are we now? And I also want to show a real-world example where we are code-driven and where we use code to drive our processes. And in the end, I will hand over to Sven from Webiny. Webiny is an open-source CMS system which we are evaluating at the moment, which might be a good fit for some reason. So who's talking and who's also not talking today? Yes, Fabian is not talking today since his son was delivered last week. So he's busy with some other stuff. And so it's on me to present our stuff to you and to show you what we are doing with code and communications. So where communication goes code-driven? For sure, the easiest part is in the area of technology. So for all our infrastructure, all the services, applications, and processes that we are building on our technology, that's where we are code-driven. But why we are code-driven? So in communications, why we say we need to be code-driven? So we need to go back in time a bit to the year 2018. It was a year when we joined the communications department out of IT. And at that point in time, the business transformation should be supported. So it was a time of a fleet of ships time. So everyone is doing things differently, and we need to have different speeds. And so we also need to support this from a communications perspective. And for sure, communication said, we go the agile way of working to create all our things, and how we produce our content and how we bring that out and how the things should look like. That leads to the fact that we need to scale from one to many, or even the other way around. Sometimes it's also a use case to scale down on short notice. And on the other hand, we found a world where all was external. So all the platforms that were in communication were mainly run from agencies, and we from Siemens had nearly no control what's happening there, how to operate this, what can we do with that platform, by when can we have something. And for sure that leads to a lack of performance and also stability. So back in that time, Siemens.com website was down for external customers several times a month. And there were also very long release cycles, 2 or 3 releases maximum a year. And of course, if you now want to support an agile way of working and bring live your new increments and present something or bring value to the customers, yeah, you can say, line up for the next release. So, what would be the journey for the future back in time for us? So we said, okay, we would need a platform which fulfills the needs to scale that way. And we thought about what should be our travel guide for this journey, to set our own principles or foundational framework for that. The first thing we figured out is empower with knowledge. So bring the knowledge back in-house, know what's possible and what you need and what you can do. Second thing is streamline and scale. So we were only a few people when we started that. And if we want to deliver things, for sure we can't handle all the stuff with configuration and so on. So automation is key. So that's one thing, try to automate everything. Here, mastering of ownership. So it's our platform, it should be our code, should be our assets. We need to know what's going on there and we need to be in control. For sure, we would have external partners to scale, but in the end, the code needs to be with us and we need to be able anytime to take control and to extend or shut something down or bring something new. For sure, we need to be data-driven. One thing or one aspect, log everything. So if something goes wrong, that we can check why it's going wrong. And on the other end, we need to know, does it pay off? So if we are building things, are the things used? Do they bring value or is it just for fun what we are doing here? Leveraging innovation, open source and serverless. We said, okay, we want to use as much open source as it is possible for now or during that journey. Since we have a great community there, we don't need to spend time in thinking how we could solve problems, since problems are in most cases already solved somewhere. And as I said, we need time to focus on the things we will deliver and not on configuring server farms. And that we also said, go serverless wherever possible. Fast and flexible. For sure, if you go the agile way and want to bring out all the increments in time, you need to be fast and also flexible if something changes. So we start small. And one important point for us is refactoring is not a bad thing. Refactoring is part of the standard daily process. So there is nothing we do wrong. We do things because we are doing them, we need them now, and we can also change them later on. And that's where we also said, embrace the Yagni principle. So don't discuss around things you may need someone, maybe with someone. So discuss and solve the things you know you need now. And for sure, loose coupling. So be API-driven, event-driven, so that we are always able to replace things under the hood without destroying the top of it. Okay, then the question, how to build this? What do we need for this, to bring this live? Then we found out it's quite easy. You just need a cloud, and you need something to do DevOps and to orchestrate this cloud. So that's where we are now. So what do we have now? Our foundation is, as said, Code Siemens Com. That was a time where we began discussing with each other since when we set up our infrastructure, so we are orchestrating our AWS accounts with the technologies there. We set it all up as code so that we can control it and we can change it and we know every time what was changed and who changed it why. Main open source components we are facilitating. For sure, GitLab, Terraform, Visual Studio Code, WordPress, Drupal, and for the APIs we are using Apollo GraphQL. There was also a nice talk last year. And our front end, Siemens.com front end is based on Vue.js at the moment. Some facts with that platform, we are doing now more than 100 deployments a month. We are running more than 200 servers that are externally reachable, and we have more than 1,200 serverless functions running that are externally reachable. So how does it look like? Something like that. I don't want to go in detail now. That's I don't. No worries. If you are interested, we can talk at the bar later on. But one point is we are serving 1.6 billion HTTP requests a month. And I guess nearly every Siemens employee will hit one of our applications a day. So for instance, it's Siemens.com is mentioned, it's Siemens Hello Page, it's Siemens FM, Siemens Blog. Also the webcasts are running on our platform here. And yeah, as you see, we are code driven. with all the things. So one example where code-driven approach helps us to improve quality and also web consistency. Imagine you're somewhere in a region and your business developed a fancy car charger like this. Then of course you want to present this on the Siemens website. You can do for sure with all the standard components that are there, but for instance the 3D model is not something in the standard components, or at least not for specific this kind of car charger. And in the past, what would happen? You go to some agency in your region and say, hey, I need a fancy 3D model. They will do all the work, all the design, all the UX, and then at some point in time, they are coming, here is it, please integrate it in Siemens.com, and nothing fits together. So we had this in the past with roughly about 1,500 integrations across the globe. And that was also one thing why Siemens.com was down in the past several times, as I mentioned before. And we tried to streamline it a bit and to build components into our core that you can use, but of course it doesn't fulfill every business need. And that's why we thought about how could we support this, since it's a reason behind why people are doing this for sure. And we established a small process. It starts with a help desk where you can say, okay, I would need some special integration. And then you discuss with our ecosystem team, and maybe it's feasible to do it with standard components the other way, then it's fine, then we don't need a special integration. And if it's not possible, then we jump out to code. So we are facilitating a code Siemens.com and use Terraform to create then our repositories for each of the applications, to prepare the pipelines in there already, to bring some example code in. And from that point in time, the developer of the application of the agency gets onboarded to code Siemens.com and needs to build the application on our platform. Needs to build it and needs to deploy it from there. So we don't accept that the code gets compiled somewhere else and then we have just some things. We want them to build the code within code Siemens.com. So we own the code, so we can control it and we see what's happening there. And the benefit for the developers, for sure, it's an integrated environment. So whenever the developer checks or commits the code, automatically a pipeline starts that deploys that code to a development environment for that application. And so every commit can be checked by the developer if it's working. And once it's working, it goes one step further and goes to our staging environment where we already do some checks within the pipeline, where we can check, does it fit to our CSP policy? Or are some resources referenced that are not allowed here? And also, we can check if it fits our coding guidelines. And that's also the environment where stakeholders then can say, okay, the application is doing what I want, go for production. But that's not the point where we would said go to production. Then we start automatic comments on that merge request to production, which triggers the right people. So from ecosystem to check if the concept is still valid or if they programmed something else. Then we can ensure that branding guidelines are correct. So we automatically send a mail to branding support, and they are also working within code Siemens.com to give direct feedback to the developers that what shall be changed. From analytics, we have some people that are checking the things, and for sure from our end, Fabian and me, we are also checking if all is defined and if we feel confident to bring that code to productive environment. And once that is done, we deploy it automatically into the production environment of Siemens.com, and we are live with that. And that's one example where no coding people are really working with code Siemens.com to ensure consistency and quality of our websites. So, as mentioned, we are always looking around what could fit to our foundational framework. And as we said, we want to use open source and we want to be serverless. We are also evaluating in the area of CMS And that's where we found Webiny. And today, Sven from Webiny is with us and will spend some words to a CMS that might be a good fit for us in future. Are there some questions so far to that part? Otherwise, I will switch over. Okay, Sven.
Thank you, Chris. It's like passing on a baton. All right, so I'm Sven, and I'm the only thing standing between you and dinner, so sorry for that. But just bear with me for the next 20 minutes where I'm going to talk about what it means to be the next-gen CMS, right? So every once in a while, there's an alignment of advances in technology that allow us to build these next-gen experiences, these products that disrupt the current markets, right? So today, I'm going to talk about what next-gen means, right? And how that relates to our platform. Now, when we mention next-gen, what do we mean with that term, right? Is it the infrastructure or maybe the feature set that that product has? Or maybe is it the way the user interacts with it, the way the UI looks like, or the way we architected the whole thing, right? Or maybe something else, something like a business model, right? Well, before I dive into all of that, just a quick introduction about myself. So I'm the CEO and co-founder at Webiny, and I spent about a decade in like this enterprise CMS space. So I had a web development agency where we were building projects using many different CMSs for customers pretty much around the globe. And through that experience, I used and gained quite a lot of knowledge about the CMS market, right? And with that, I was never happy with the current offering on the market. And that sparked that second part of the journey. With the last 5 years, I spent pretty much building Webiny and the team around it, right? Because it's a big project, it's an open source project, and with an open source project, we also built a hefty community that's ever growing now. We as a company, so we're not just a project, we're an established company. We went through Y Combinator, and there, it's an important part of our journey because there we learned from founders of companies like Airbnb, GitLab, Stripe. How do you build a company that is developer first, that has a community, that is open source, right? So we went on a proper journey here. But in case you want to reach out, you can find me on Twitter. Now, back to our topic. So what is next gen? What are the components that make a next gen product, right? Well, the answer is it's a bit complicated, right? Because it's all of that, and it's even more than this, right? Now, for the sake of time today, I'm going to just focus on two. I'm going to focus on the next gen or the advancements in technology in the infrastructure space, as well as the advances in the business model, because those two are really, really important. So let's talk about the infrastructure, right? Now, many years ago, right, when we wanted a server, we got an actual box, right? And it took weeks or months to get that box. So we had to manage both the hardware aspect of our servers as well as the software aspects, right? That was very time-consuming, very expensive, right? So later, we moved into the cloud where we got virtualization and we were able to provision machines, servers, much quicker through virtual machines and containers. And parts of the whole heavy lifting was offloaded from us. It was moved to the cloud vendor. So they now manage all of the complexities, but still, there's quite a lot of complexities on our end that we need to manage, right? And the other thing that you need to understand is between those three things, from the application point of view, the application perceives all three things as the same environment. And an application that you wrote for any of these can work on the physical, can work on a container, and vice versa, right? So from the application point of view, there wasn't a lot of advances. Actually, it's the same thing. We're just running on a different environment, right? But that's where now we have another step, and that is serverless, right? When we talk about serverless, we're not talking about containers, we're talking about proper serverless services. So, which work very differently to virtualization, because with virtualization, we still are running our application within an operating system. Here, we're building an application that is built on top of services. A database is a service. It's no longer a cluster, right? The only way I can interact with it is an API. But you might think that, oh, I'm just offloading the guest and the container system to somebody else. But actually, the fact that I'm just dealing with the application and the fact that I'm just dealing with services means a lot more, because now I don't care about if my database runs on one server or 10,000 servers. I don't care about if one of those servers goes down, because it's completely invisible to me. And that is the benefit of serverless. Now, coming to those benefits, right? So there's a lot that serverless brings to the table. One of the most important benefits serverless brings is the tremendous cost savings, because the nature how you consume serverless services is very different. It's not built by the hour, right? It's built by usage. So how many API calls I did, how many items I stored in a bucket and things like that. Just that notion of me paying for things that I used and not being able to over-provision things that I don't need brings tremendous cost savings. Some reports show those cost savings from like 40% to 80%, right? And the other aspect is the fact that this scaling happens instantaneously. I don't need any DevOps people. So I'm saving a ton of time for my DevOps people by them not needing to scale, maintain, and patch my servers, because there's no servers, right? So there's a lot of savings happening on that end as well. Now, when we talk about security also, because I'm not running on servers or containers that have operating systems on them, I don't need to patch that, right? I don't need to think about, is there another exploit, so my team needs to rush in and install it, right? Because it's done by the cloud vendor for me, right? Again, a tremendous cost savings happening there, but also I'm more secure. The other aspect why serverless is more secure is that there's less attack vectors. Serverless or services, you usually interact with them through an API. So there's no ports and things like that that you can mismanage, misconfigure, and that somebody can exploit down the line, right? Now, there's also the business resilience and uptime, right? So Siemens Com can go down if you kind of put a stress on it and things like that, right? With serverless, you scale in and out to millions of users instantaneously. It's so powerful and so quick to respond in actual production that, I mean, it just adds a ton to your business resiliency, right? And finally, it's a competitive advantage when you think about it, because if you got all of these savings in time and money, and if you reinvest them in not managing your infrastructure, not scaling and securing your infrastructure because it's done by the cloud vendor, and put them in effort to make more products, ship faster, you can get ahead of your competition. That is the big game changer for serverless. And what AWS is saying, what their CTO is saying, is that serverless is the future of infrastructure, is the future of how all applications are going to be developed. And we at Webiny are kind of like, that is first and foremost for us, right? We saw that in practice, we know it works, and we know these benefits are real. So that's one aspect of the two bits that I mentioned that I'm going to talk about. And the other one is the business model, right? So I think both have to work hand in hand to make a truly great next-gen experience. And to paint the picture of the advancements in the business model space, let's look from where we started. And similarly to the serverless story, when we talk about business model, previously, like many years ago, if you wanted to buy a software, say an Oracle database, you will get a box. Right? The software was packaged with the hardware, and that's what you got, right? But the downside of that is it's very expensive, because now you have to buy the box, right? You have to buy the electricity for the box, the cooling, the location, everything around that. You need to worry about physical security. So this was very, very expensive, right? And the fact that if you wanted to buy something, it took months to get properly installed, right? So it was very time consuming. And the whole aspect of maintaining, updating, patching, and all of that also took a long, long time. So we kind of the whole market moved away from that, right? And we moved to SaaS, right? Which is kind of the standard of today. Most businesses consume SaaS applications because, it's much easier to just buy a license for a software that's hosted in the cloud. So you no longer need to buy physical things, you just buy access to the software that is hosted by the vendor, right? But there's a problem with that. One of the problems is that that software can't be adopted to fit your needs, right? Because you either use it as it is, or you adopt your organization to that software, which can be very, very expensive, right? The other thing is that you don't really own your data, right? Your data is with the vendor. It's on their servers, right? They are the ones responsible for securing it. And the whole notion of security there, well, it's based on trust and not control, which is a big kind of a breaking point for a lot of organizations. And I think you saw that notion from Chris's talk. Control adds resiliency, reliability, and is able to streamline processes for organizations. SaaS actually breaks all of that, right? And lastly, oftentimes I saw that, for example, an SAP update to a major version is a multi-million-dollar cost to its users. It takes years to upgrade such a product. And if you're running with something like that's in the cloud, those updates are not paced with the pace how you adopt your internal processes. So the SaaS software can change its version, change its way, how it works, and can break your processes on your side of your organization. And then you're in this broken state until you catch up with the update. And by the time you catch up with the update, there's another one, right? This is very problematic for a lot of organizations. So the alternative was to move to open source, right? We saw, again, from Chris's talk and from many of your talks today, let's go open source, right? You can adopt the product to your needs, right? You can customize it. You can fine-tune it exactly to fit and make it work the way you want it. But through that, you have to self-host it. But through self-hosting, you get that control and ownership of your data. You know exactly where your data is, in which geo it's stored, how it's secured. You have the full ownership of it. But the problem with open source is there's no strategic alignment. Open source is software, right? And you use that package, but if that maintainer of that package suddenly builds features that you like and then decides to take a project somewhere else, you're left stranded, right? You do not have the influence to bring that roadmap to something that fits more towards your needs, right? Also, support. Did anybody try getting support of an open source package through GitHub? I mean, if you got a response in a timely fashion, you were in luck, right? It's pretty much non-existent, right? You can't, again, influence that product. Oh, just one second. And it's that whole aspect of self-hosting, it does bring that benefit of control, but you're going to have to pay for it, right? It's going to be very, very costly. So what's new in that space, right? What is the next gen business model? Well, it's actually open source, but there's a flavor of open source called commercial open source. It works slightly different than to your regular open source. And in practice, this is how it looks in practice is you have a project, but that project uses what's called the dual licensing model. So the core of the project, let's say 80% of the core is open sourced under a permissive license like MIT or Apache or something like that. But then the other 20 are still under an open source license, but under a proprietary license that you need to buy in order to be able to use and customize that other part of the code, right? So you might think, how does that make any sense, right? But it makes a lot of sense because if you pay for that access through that commercial transaction, you're establishing a different type of a relationship. And you're directly supporting the long-term development of that project, right? But that relationship is also important because through that, you're going to get a proper support, right? You're going to get customer success managers, you're going to get support teams, you're going to get SLAs and all of the support ecosystem that an enterprise might need to run critical applications on open source software. But also, now you're interacting with a business. You're not interacting with a product, with just something sitting on GitHub, right? And the fact you're interacting with a business and you have contracts with that business and you're supporting in a commercial way that business, you'll get a seat at the table. You're going to be asked, hey, what do you need from our roadmap? Because we value you, dear customer, right? Tell us how can we support you better, right? All of the whole relationship between your company and that company that's bringing that software to the market changes for the better, right? Now, if we still kind of compare all the three business models with the lens of the total cost of ownership, right? I think like the TCO is one of the always the bottom lines that we need to consider, right? The open source, although it might look cheap as it's free in the start, it's actually very, very expensive in practice because of the infrastructure setup and maintenance, and because of the lack of support. That means you will need to educate and bring your own support team. So not only you bring your infrastructure, you're bringing your own support team, and that pretty much explodes the cost when it comes to running critical applications at scale on just open source software. So that's kind of still the main selling point of SaaS, right? That total cost of ownership is quite low, right? But you still use that ability to control your data and the pace of upgrades. Still, as an alternative, many companies today, like Siemens, in certain cases prefer to go down the, in a way, commercial open source aspect, where you do lift that total cost of ownership a bit over SaaS, but you get that control, right? So you pay more. So if we just look through the total cost of ownership, SaaS is still a clear winner, right? Well, in a way, because if we bring back that first benefit that I mentioned, serverless, that drastically reduces the cost of infrastructure, running the infrastructure, and combine it with a product running on commercial open source license where you get that support, control, and strategic alignment, you actually have a completely different type of a solution on the market, one that you can scale, reduce costs at the same time, and you can customize and be fully in control of your destiny. So these two tremendously make a big difference. And this is actually one of the founding pillars upon which we built Webiny, right? Webiny is an open source CMS specifically targeted for enterprises. And we built it on top of the AWS serverless infrastructure stack. And not only we offer ready-made applications, we also ship the product with a development framework, so the whole aspect of customizing the product is much simpler. We abstract away all of the complexities when dealing with serverless. And actually, many customers of ours, including Warner Brothers and several others, and now in discussions with Siemens, are using the platform to start getting all of those benefits, all of those savings, increasing their resiliency without needing to go through the complexities of serverless, how do you set it up and all of that, because Webiny takes care of all of that for you. Right? And I just want to kind of, in case you want to learn more about Webiny, you can check out our website. And again, open source project, everything's on our GitHub. But just to kind of end, and I'm sure everybody's in rush for dinner, I am. But as a quick summary, so serverless unlocks the scalability, the security, and lowers the cost. And open source unlocks the customizability and empowers you to store, secure, deliver your data under your rules. But the two together truly make that next-gen experience. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So I definitely respect this commercial open source business model, but I definitely don't agree on your summary and that you say that I have no commercial support for open source software. I mean, I definitely agree that it doesn't make much sense to always build the in-house knowledge and experience, but definitely for open source projects, I have the options to go to commercial support. I mean, there are lots of consulting companies out there and so on. So I definitely agree to your summary that commercial plus open source makes sense, but there are lots of more business models which probably didn't make it on your slides. It's just a smaller remark from my side.
Thank you for that. That truly is. I mean, we could have expanded the whole open source business model quite broadly. The gist that I wanted to kind of make in my presentation is, even if you're thinking of going in the open source, you need to think about that commercial aspect, both from us as maintainers and creators of open source projects, but as well as from the other side. Sure, a third party might provide you support for an open source project, but how are you ensuring the future of that open source project? Shouldn't be in your interest that open source project is on the market tomorrow because your business relies and potentially makes money through using that product.
I mean, we invest a lot of money or resources in sustaining the future of open source projects by, for example, also paying those third parties to support the development. But don't get me wrong, I definitely understand your business model. It's perfectly fine, just didn't want to have this generic summary here.
To be honest, like, not commercial open source is not a model for every open source project. That's true, because there's a lot of open source projects that shouldn't be even commercialized, because when you commercialize it, in a way, there's an owner, and that might go against the belief of an open source, right? There are projects in that sense, and I'm totally in favor of those projects of not being commercialized. But for the commercial aspects, for the projects where other businesses need a bit more and need to influence the roadmap, and you as a creator of such a project, you need to make a decision. That was one of the decisions we had to make. How will we open source this? Do we want to be influenced by the market, or do we want to steer in our direction? In our case, because we're building a content management system for enterprises, we needed that enterprise input. We needed enterprises to come to the table with us to tell us, how do you build the next gen enterprise CMS? Because alone wouldn't work. We needed that bi-directional relationship to happen. So.
I guess we understand your use case, and for sure, I mean, Siemens, we need to sell our products to earn our living, and for you it's the same. So, on the other hand, you listed on your slides MongoDB and Elastic, and well, we were using this component, at least partially, but there we have the problem that most of the developers do not really understand what the licensing situation is. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's described somewhere, but it might be a little bit too easy for the developers, let's say, to use MongoDB somewhere. And there are too many examples how easy it is to use, but then they try to use it in a commercial environment, and suddenly you have a problem, because either you have a GPL or SSPL, yeah, or you need to have a commercial contract, which then it's a little bit tricky.
It is.
I understand for your use case, you need to input from the big enterprises, and maybe you've described it in a better way. At least now in your presentation you did it. But again, I'm one of the people being responsible for software license compliance within Siemens, and let's say MongoDB and Elastic make our life not easier.
I'm with you. So one of the experiences I had was also working for a large enterprise at one point. I think developers need to be well educated. We need to start educating developers on what licenses actually mean, what are permissive, what are non-permissive licenses, because not a lot of developers understand the licensing options, and oftentimes can pull in something that is AGPL or something like that and completely break your compliance on the other side of your software. So larger organizations usually do internal internal education of developers and what different licenses mean. Some have restrictions in the builds, in the CI/CD pipelines to pull in, like FOSS or something like that. They can tell you all the licenses in your dependency trees, and then you can kind of block developers from even pulling in different dependencies that are not compliant with your existing licenses and things like that. But with the commercial open source aspect, like those projects are usually MongoDB is a for-profit. It's a public company, so they do make money. So usually those have a pricing somewhere stated. So that should be kind of an indicator. Yes, I'm using this for free, but I'm with you. Unless, again, education and actual processes to block the usage of third-party software unless it meets your compliance licenses is, I think, one way to go. So, yeah, but it shouldn't be hidden. That's one thing. It's like you shouldn't hide the fact that you're commercial and that you're going to need to pay for that. So.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I also agree with some part of your analysis with regards to the open source and the SaaS. I think it's great if you have, like Siemens.com, a team who knows GitLab very well and can do merge requests themselves, so that you're really in control. But that is, like in total cost of ownership, it costs some effort.
Yeah.
The other end is you have a SaaS offering and someone is guaranteeing for an SLA or something. So you can really say it's someone else's job. If it's broken, you fix it.
Yeah.
And in this kind of, if I have those two things, for me, commercial open source is somehow the worst case, because I pay someone who then says, okay, I have a guaranteed response time. I'm not fixing it, I'm responding. And yeah, then I can't reproduce it on my system, and you run in a lot of trouble. So my question to you would be, how does Webiny, like what kind of guarantee can I get from you that makes it valuable for me?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? So with customers, in our case, and probably different companies do it differently, right? We can align ourselves as a tier 3 support for escalations, meaning that, because usually what happens in our case, it's the client takes in our software, and it's the development team within the client organization that takes on the software, adopts the software, adds new stuff to the software, and then when something breaks, they're usually there's a tier 1, and then they are the engineering team within the customer is tier 2. If they're not able to fix it on their end, they escalate it to us as tier 3, right? So we support their engineering team, right? Sometimes the customer, we don't support the software directly. So if you run our software in production and there's an issue that your user reported, that wouldn't come to us. That would come to your internal teams, because Webiny, because of the open source nature, it's a self-hosted product that you can customize. So you have to be the first responder. For some, again, that works well. For some, it doesn't. But the benefit is you're in control. You can adopt the software. And at the same time, if your engineering team that adopted the software can't debug it, it's not a dead end. It's not a ticket on GitHub that doesn't get responded in 2 weeks. No, it's a third tier with an SLA support agreement that ensures you're up and running in no time. So it depends on what do you need, right? And how critical that application is, and it's not an off-the-shelf, right? It's a solution that is designed to be customized. So if you're just looking for something off the shelf with no support from internal development teams, Webiny is not for you, right? Yeah, you have to see what your needs are and if they are well conveyed in the software you want to adopt. So.
Thank you very, very much, Sven, for the insights on Webiny, and also thanks a lot, Christoph and Fabian, for the insights on how you run Siemens.com.